Well, I have been camping all this last week, and so I will not be preaching this morning. But I've asked someone to come and preach in my place, and I'm glad to introduce to you someone who has been many things to me. He's been a boss to me. He hired me as the youth pastor at Turner Christian Church many years ago, and I spent over 14 years in ministry alongside him. So he's been a mentor to me, he's been an encouragement to me, he's been an educator to me. I'll let you know he's much smarter than I am, so you'll have the privilege of listening to a smart preacher this morning. And now I'm just glad to say that he is a friend to me and a brother in Christ. And so I want to introduce D.H. Shearer this morning, who will be preaching, and he is going to share with us the value of the kingdom of God.
Most people appreciate a good story. As the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell the story of Jesus, they portray him as a storyteller. In fact, Matthew observes that at one point during the ministry of Jesus, he taught exclusively by means of parables. Now, the Gospel of John does not record any of the parables of Jesus. It's not that John denied that Jesus was a great storyteller. Remember, he was an apostle. He was there when Jesus told his stories. It's just that he reported the life of Jesus from a different perspective. But at any rate, stories such as the one that Jesus told are a great way of getting a point across. You know, sometimes it's difficult for us to think in abstract terms, but stories taken from everyday life, well, it brings it all down to earth for us. And they start us all on common ground. You don't have to have an extensive biblical background in order to understand a good story. Now, technically speaking, these stories that Jesus told are classified as extended metaphors of participation. Now, that's just a fancy way to say that they are designed to draw you into the story so that you can connect the dots and you can discover and apply truth for yourself. So there's always a sense of what did this story say to you? As we come to see ourselves in the parables, we participate in them. In a way, we become a part of them. They are extended metaphors of participation. And that's certainly the case in the two parables that I'd like to look at today. They're found in Matthew chapter 13, verses 44 through 46. And Matthew arranges them together for good reason, because they complement each other. They both deal with the joy that comes from finding something of incredible value. In the first instance, a treasure is found in the midst of a field. And in the second, a merchant is out looking for fine pearls when he comes across a real beauty. But no one needs to explain to us the joy they must have felt. It's obvious. I mean, after all, how would you have felt? On one occasion, our whole extended family gathered together at my house to celebrate my granddaughter Caitlin's birthday. Now, the house was a whirlwind of family and friends. We have a nephew named Josh who was adopted into the family. He was about 5 years old at the time, and looking longingly out the window into Linda's garden in the backyard, he somehow convinced himself that pirates had buried their treasure back there. Now, he had a pretty active imagination. I suppose he still does. But imagine, pirates buried their treasure in my backyard. Well, there was no time to lose. We had to get a shovel and start digging holes in my backyard, searching for that buried treasure. So we went to the shed and we got out a shovel. Linda saw us and said, "What on earth are you doing?" And I answered, "Well, isn't it obvious? What's it look like? We're digging for buried treasure." We started digging in a few selected spots where we wouldn't disrupt any of the plants. At one point, when Josh wasn't looking, I flipped a dime down and into the hole. And you should have seen his eyes bug out when he found that dime. I mean, who would have thought buried treasure in Uncle D.H.'s backyard? I knew there were pirates back there. So before we left, we marked the spot with a huge X. After all, that's what you're supposed to do. X marks the spot. No, nobody needs to remind us how much joy there is when you find a great treasure, especially as we will see when that treasure is none other than the kingdom of heaven. So here's what I would like for you to remember today. Some people find the kingdom by accident, and some people find it intentionally. But in either case, it's worth everything that we have. Some people find the kingdom by accident, some people find it intentionally, but in either case, it's worth everything that we have. So let's take a look at that sentence a little bit more closely. First of all, some people find the kingdom by accident. The first parable demonstrates what I'm talking about. I'm in Matthew 13, verse 44. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, Jesus said. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy, he sold all he had and bought that field. Now, don't let the brevity of this parable lull you into thinking it can't be all that important. After all, it's just one verse. Now, it might seem a little strange to you that someone would stumble across a treasure that had been hidden in somebody else's field. But this is not as far-fetched as it sounds. The rabbis used to teach that the safest bank was the earth. Now, there were banks in the ancient world, but they were not for common, ordinary people like you and me. Besides, banks could be robbed, and there was no FDIC guaranteeing your deposits. So common, ordinary people often simply buried their treasure in the ground. And by the way, you'll remember that that is what the third servant did in the parable of the talents. Because his master was an important person, the servant could have deposited it in the bank. But instead, he took his one talent and he buried it in the ground only to dig it up upon his master's return. My father-in-law used to have a can that, for all appearances, looked like an ordinary can of Diet Pepsi. It sat for years on a shelf in their home. But this was no ordinary can of Diet Pepsi. The top screwed off, and you could hide all sorts of valuable things inside and then hide it in plain sight. Now, this was no more than a novelty for him, so I do feel rather free telling you about it. And as far as I know, he never kept anything of any value inside. But still, the principle is not so different from burying a treasure in a field. The treasure may be readily accessible by anyone who knows where it is and has a shovel, but as long as secrecy is maintained, well, who would ever think of stealing it? Who would ever know? Of course, there is a major flaw in this system. I mean, what if someone finds your treasure by accident? Or what if you plumb forget where you hid it? Or even worse, what if you forget that you hid it at all? I mean, we've all heard stories of people who have squirreled away all sorts of money in different places in their homes, cookie jars, under the mattress, between the pages of a book, or even in the freezer. They've got so much money hidden in so many different places they can't possibly keep track of it all. So this story that Jesus tells is exactly the kind of thing that could very well happen. A man buries his treasure in the field. I don't know, maybe he forgets that it's there. Maybe he dies and the secret dies with him. But in any case, someone stumbles across it and he wants to make that treasure his own. But he's no thief. So how can he ethically acquire that treasure? Well, that's easy. He can buy the field and the treasure will come with it. Now, I know what you're thinking. By our laws and our customs, that sounds a bit shady, like taking advantage of an ignorant landowner who doesn't realize the true value of what he owns. And by the way, it's always a pretty dicey thing to have an expert appraise the value of something for you and then to have him make an offer to buy it. Appraisals should always be done by a disinterested and neutral third party. And it's illegal to present yourself as an expert appraiser and then to misrepresent the value of an item for your own personal profit. But you know, things were very different back in the ancient world. Actually, the Talmud, which is a Jewish commentary of sorts on the law of Moses, the Talmud addressed this very issue. It says that a person must always tell the truth in such transactions as buying or selling a field, but that he was under no obligation to volunteer any information. In other words, if the other person fails to do his due diligence, well, then that's his problem and not yours. So this fellow finds a treasure hidden in a field. He's no thief. He can't just steal it. The best he can do is to purchase the field, which he does. And if the owner of the field is unaware that there's buried treasure in it, well, that's on him. But in terms of this parable, the important thing is that he comes across this treasure completely by accident. I mean, this is not the case of somebody who has an old treasure map that leads him to great riches. In fact, as William Barclay observes, it may be that this man was hired out as a common laborer working in the field when he found that treasure. And if that's the case, then we would surmise that this treasure was found as he went about his normal, everyday business. But in any case, he found the treasure by accident. And Jesus says that some people find the kingdom of heaven in much the same way. Now, I can't speak for you, but that's how it was for me. I don't think that I found the kingdom nearly as much as the kingdom found me. That may not seem fair, but it didn't take a whole lot of effort on my part to become a Christian. I was raised in a Christian home by Christian parents. We always went to church as a family. And so for me to come forward, to confess my faith, to be baptized into Christ, and to find the kingdom, well, that was just a perfectly natural thing to do. You know, I practically stumbled and fell into the kingdom of heaven. In fact, my earliest memories as a small child involved being in a church nursery. The carpet was green, as I recall. It's funny the kinds of things that you remember. But the point is that I was not looking for God. Apparently, however, he was looking for me. And I suppose that was no accident. Now, we need to move quickly on to the second short parable that Jesus told. If the first parable speaks of finding the kingdom by accident, then the second story illustrates that some people find the kingdom intentionally. And by that, I mean that they come to know the Lord only after an intentional search on their part. And it can be a long, agonizing, lifelong, soul-searching search. I mean, who knows what all they tried in order to find some kind of fulfillment. I mean, drugs, sex, shallow relationships, but somehow it just wasn't enough. And they got left completely discombobulated. Maybe they even dabbled in a mystery religion or in a cult or two. So look at how Jesus describes it. In Matthew 13, verses 45 and 46, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant searching for fine pearls, he said. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything that he had, and he bought it. In this story, a merchant is out there diligently searching for pearls, and not just any pearls. He's searching for fine pearls. Now, in the ancient world, pearls were even more valuable than they are today. Today we have cultured pearls. They're not entirely man-made, but they got their start that way. But in Jesus' day, every pearl was an act of nature. A contaminant, a grain of sand of some sort, got inside of an oyster, and a pearl was formed as a result. And this merchant searching for pearls, he wanted only the best. No effort was spared as he searched high and low for the finest of pearls. He went to the high-class jewelry stores and then to the local flea markets, and everywhere in between. Finding fine pearls was his life's pursuit. And in the same way, Jesus says that some people will only find the kingdom after a great deal of searching. As Martin Luther reflected on this short parable, as he connected the dots, as we said, he found himself in it. And he said that if anyone could be saved by monkery, and that is by being a monk, that he would certainly be a citizen of heaven. I mean, he had it made, and that's because, as far as he knew, he was one of the best monks there was. But somehow that just wasn't enough. Luther was still vexed by the thought that it took more than just being a good monk to enter into the kingdom of heaven. And as he searched the scriptures diligently, he came to understand that he could only be justified in God's sight by faith in Jesus Christ and not by his own many good works. In fact, as far as Luther was concerned, the entire Bible could be interpreted in light of this simple yet profound truth, that the just shall live by faith. Sola fide. But it did not come easy. You see, Martin Luther was a merchant searching for fine pearls. And as the prophet Jeremiah wrote, "You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart." Jesus said, "Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you." And all the verbs there are in the imperfect tense. Keep on asking, keep on seeking, keep on knocking. That's because God's answers don't always come easily or all at once. So some people find the kingdom by accident, while others will find it only after intentionally searching for it. But there's one last thing that we dare not overlook, that no matter how you find the kingdom, it is worth everything that you have. You see, in the end, it's not important that you came to know Christ in the same way that I did, or that I came to know him in the same way that you did. We all have our own unique experiences and stories to tell. So there's no reason to look upon one another with suspicion. What's important is that no matter how you got there, you got into the kingdom and you came to know Jesus. So look back at these two stories again, and I want you to look at what they have in common. The man who found the treasure in the field recognized its worth. And so we read in verse 44 that in his joy he sold all he had and he bought that field. And what did the merchant do when he found his amazing pearl of great price? Well, he went away and he sold everything he had and he bought it. We read that in verse 46. You see, in both cases, they recognize just how valuable the kingdom is. And that's how it is with each of us. You see, there's no mention of them trying to negotiate a better price, nor do we read that their acquisition required only a small minor contribution on their part. They both ended up selling everything they owned in order to gain the kingdom, because in the end, they both realized that the kingdom of heaven is of supreme value. The hymn writer Elisha Hoffman put it this way as I close. You have longed for sweet peace and for faith to increase and have earnestly, fervently prayed. But you cannot have rest or be perfectly blessed until all on the altar is laid. Would you walk with the Lord in the light of his word and have peace and contentment always? You must do his sweet will to be free from all ill. On the altar, your all you must lay. Who can tell all the love he will send from above and how happy our hearts will be made? Of the fellowship sweet we shall share at his feet when our all on the altar is laid. Some people find the kingdom by accident, and some people find it intentionally. But in either case, it's worth everything that we have. Amen.